Chapter 309, Sienna Meridian 5. In one of Pentagon's hotels, Christina was looking down from a window in a luxurious top-floor suite as the whole city below her was dyed white. Although the people of the city had been confused by the unannounced snowfall, everyone was now out on the streets enjoying the surprise event. "I really want to see what a snowball fight is like," Rhaimira muttered from her seat on a large sofa. Sitting across from her, Mare glared down at the cards spread out in front of Rhaimira and hissed, "You can have as many snowball fights as you like afterward." "Snow never fell at the Dragon Demon Castle," Rhaimira continued to mutter. "Ever since this lady was born, I have never once seen it snow. If you really want to see it, you can just look out the window, can't you?" Mare impatiently recommended. "This lady cannot be satisfied with just seeing the snow from here," Rhaimira insisted. "I wish to have a snowball fight." Mare sighed. Really now, if you want to do it, then just go down there on your own and have a go at it." Rhaimira retorted. "Where's the fun in trying to have a snowball fight by myself?" "Mare, this lady wants to have a snowball fight with you." "Sorry, but I'm afraid I can't do that. Sir Eugene and Lady Sienna might be returning any moment now," Mare grumbled as she slowly stretched her hand toward the cards laid out in front of Rhaimira. "Why don't you tell me where you put the joker?" "I don't know why you're expecting this lady to reveal something like that," Rhaimira sniffed. "It's because I don't want to pick the joker," Mare honestly replied. The two had been focusing on their card game for a while now. In fact, Mare would also prefer to go out with Rhaimira and have a snowball fight or build a snowman instead of staying in this room and playing cards or fidgeting by herself. However, like she had just said, Mare felt there was no way she could go outside right now, especially with all her anticipation. The sun was slowly starting to set. Eugene and Sienna might be back at any moment. Mare wanted to wait patiently in this room so that she could welcome Sienna and Eugene once they were back. Although having a snowball fight or building a snowman with Rhaimira might be fun, if she allowed herself to get too absorbed in those sorts of activities, wouldn't her best clothes that she had specially prepared become drenched by the snow? You never know. "They might not be back today," Christina, who had been looking out of the window, suddenly spoke up. It was actually Anis. Indeed. Since they finally had a proper reunion after hundreds of years, they'll have so much to talk about that even spending an entire night together might not be enough for them. Mare voiced her agreement with a nod as she drew one of Rhaimira's cards. "Who is the joker?" "So much to talk about." "Well, I'm sure there'll be some talking," Anis muttered with a sullen expression as she plopped down on the sofa in front of the window. "He guessed that communicating with your body was one way to have a conversation." "Sister," Christina protested. Anis scoffed. "What are you freaking out about? It's not like they're children. Technically speaking, Sienna is 300 years old. Please refrain from picturing something so shameless. Your outrageous imagination is making me terribly embarrassed, sister," Christina complained. "Christina, you might say that, but I know full well that you quite enjoy such wild fantasies," Anis accused. Christina whined. "Please, sister. Please don't insult me with such absurd claims. You might lie with your words, but your body at least is honest," Anis thought with a snort as she opened a bottle of whiskey that had been placed on top of a table. Gluck gluck gluck. Anis poured the whiskey into a large glass until it was just on the brink of overflowing when Christina let out a short groan. "Stop with the nagging and just look the other way for a bit, Christina. If I don't drink on a day like today, when else can I drink?" Anis said as she raised her glass up to the now lightning snowfall. Anis had thought that she would be fine with this, that it wouldn't mean anything much to her. But now that it was actually happening, she didn't feel so good. "I would have never guessed that I could be such a greedy woman," Anis muttered as she brought her wineglass to her lips. Christina also couldn't help but let out a short sigh at these words. Greed, so this was greed. As a saint and a priest, Christina felt that she shouldn't be allowed to have such desires. Sensing Christina's feelings, Anis held back a wry smile as she persuaded Christina. "Since we're only human in the end, we can't help but feel such things. Where in the world could you find someone truly devoid of all desires and emotions? However, if you solely listened to your desires and emotions, you would turn from a human into a beast." This was similar to the current Anis and Christina as they patiently waited in the room, drinking by themselves as they took on the chore of babysitting these two ancient brats who were now screeching and pulling at each other's hair. Still, Anis and Christina forced themselves to persevere because they were human, not beasts. Sienna has definitely mustered up all of her determination. I let my guard down since there weren't any fireworks planned for this city, but I never imagined that she would actually make it snow, Anise thought regretfully. Christina tried to think optimistically. I don't think snow is all that special. After all, didn't we and Sir Eugene see so much snow in Roar that we got tired of it? The snow that we saw then and the snow that's falling now hold very different meanings, Anise argued. First of all, right now, aren't Eugene and Sienna watching this snowfall alone? Also, this isn't like the heavy blizzards that crazily bombarded us when we were in Roar. This light sprinkling of snow actually looks quite pretty. Christina tried to defend her point. No matter how you look at it, it's still the same snow. But Anise angrily cut her off. No, it's not the same. As someone from this era, can't you tell such a simple thing? After 300 years, a man and a woman have finally been reunited properly. They look at each other as the white snow heavily falls around them. Christina stuttered. However, Lady Sienna is the one who called down this snow. Anise sighed. Yes, I never would have imagined that Sienna could think up such an elaborate and cunning plan. Think about it carefully, Christina. What happens when you get caught in the snow? Christina didn't know what was the right answer to such a seemingly obvious question. So she didn't put too much thought into it and just replied with whatever came to mind. If you get caught in the snow, your clothes will get wet. Your body will also grow cold. Christina slowly answered. That's right. Anise declared. Whether you're a human or a beast, you'll get wet when you're out in the snow. The air is cold, and when the wind blows it feels even colder. You might even catch a cold if you get too chilly while wearing wet clothes. A cold isn't an illness that should be taken lightly, Christina thought as her inner voice began to shake. Ever so slowly, Christina was beginning to notice what Anise was trying to get at. Anise grew increasingly agitated as she spoke. If your protective covering is wet and you're feeling cold, then whether you're a human or an animal, you would do your best to get out of that situation. That means you would need to find some warmth and heat. One way to do that is to get out of the wind and into a nice hot room. Then you remove your wet clothes and do something to heat up your body. And what difference is there between people who've taken off their clothes and beasts who walk around naked? Crack. The wine glass in Anise's hand shattered. Shameless, how shameless. Christina screamed inside their head, unable to hold it in any longer. When Anise shattered the glass in her bare hands and her shoulders began to tremble, Mare and Rhaenyra, who had been fighting and pulling at each other's hair while accusing each other of cheating by secretly swapping the cards around, began to cling to each other instead as they shook in fear. The closed door of the room suddenly burst open. Anise, who hadn't even had time to think about cleaning her hand that was drenched with wine, turned her head towards it. The door had been locked, of course, and only Anise and Eugene had the key to their rooms. Anise hummed curiously. With half of his face swollen painfully, Eugene was the one who had opened the door and was now entering the room. It wasn't just his cheek that was swollen. The area around his eye was also bruised and his lips were cracked. When it came to methods of violence, Anise was an expert. She easily guessed what kind of attack was the reason for Eugene's face being so messed up that it had to have been an immensely strong slap to his left cheek. A palm, which had a wider area than a fist, had impacted the whole left side of his face. Benefactor, who? Rhaenyra screamed. After Eugene had pulled her out of Rhyzakia's stomach, Rhaenyra had taken to calling Eugene her benefactor. Sir Eugene. Mare also let out a surprised scream at the same time. Lady Sienna. Her screams quickly turned from alarm to joy. This was because Sienna had just followed the slump-shouldered Eugene into the room. Mare leaped up off the sofa and raced towards Sienna. It's all right, 3. Sienna murmured as she looked down at Mare with loving eyes and stroked her head as Mare hugged Sienna's waist. Sienna then lifted her head slightly to look around the room. A woman who looked alarmingly similar to Anise was rising from the sofa with a surprised expression. If Sienna was forced to pick out the differences, the only ones she noticed were in the shape of Christina's eyes and a teardrop mole. But the gaze transmitted from those wide eyes didn't feel unfamiliar to her. Sienna cautiously asked, Anise? Sienna. Anise called out Sienna's name in a trembling voice. Sienna's eyes were wet with tears. When she had called out Anise's name, she also had to suppress a strong tremor in her voice. In fact, just before she arrived here, Sienna had intended to pick faults with Anise. She had a big grievance against this cunning and snake-like woman who had taken advantage of a certain someone being half dead and trapped inside a seal. No matter how much Sienna had thought about it, Anis's actions had still felt cowardly and dishonest to her. However, now that she was seeing Anis in person with that expression on her face and hearing her voice, let alone picking a fight, Sienna's eyes were also welling up with tears. Anisi, Sienna. In the end, the two women burst out in tears as they called out each other's names. Sienna abruptly picked up Mare, who had still been hanging from her waist, and walked past Eugene. Anis also stepped forward to meet her while wiping off the wine that had drenched her hand. Sienna and Anis came to a momentary stop once they were in front of each other. Then, without anyone being able to tell who had initiated it first, they embraced each other tightly. Unable to escape in time, Mare was buried between Sienna and Anis. Mare agonizingly struggled to escape the pressure that was bearing down on her from both sides. But Sienna and Anis didn't pay any attention to her as they sobbed and embraced each other. Are you really Anis? Sienna asked. Yes, I am. The body might be different, but it's really me, Anis confirmed. It's just like a dream, to be able to meet with the deceased you like this once more, Sienna sobbed. It's not a dream, Sienna, Anis corrected her. This is definitely a reality. If you had to say it, then you could call it a fortunate miracle bestowed upon us by God. Still stuck in between them, Mare's struggles slowly began to die down. Anis caressed Sienna's cheeks with both hands as she smiled and said, I'm not the only one who surprisingly managed to return. You've also survived, and now I get to meet you like this. Even though hundreds of years have passed since we last met. Anis had just said what was on her mind without any other hidden intentions. However, upon hearing these words, Sienna's cheeks twitched. It's true that hundreds of years may have passed, but my body is no different from how it was hundreds of years ago, Sienna claimed. Huh? Anis responded in confusion. I completely reconstructed my body using magic, Sienna explained. I'm in the prime of my life with the same youthful appearance I have in your memories. Even though hundreds of years may have passed, that still means I haven't aged at all. For a moment, Anis couldn't understand what Sienna meant by these words and could only blink in confusion. But soon, Anis realized what Sienna was insinuating. A thin smile spread across Anis's face as she nodded slowly. That's right, Anis agreed. Unlike myself, who has died and lost my body, you still have your own body, Sienna. It's sad, but that's just how it is, Sienna said smugly. Anis disagreed. No, there's no need to be sad about it. Because the body that I'm dwelling in now is almost exactly the same as the body that I had when I was alive. Also, this is a genuine 23-year-old body that hasn't had any need for magical reconstruction. 23 years old? So you're older than Eugene, Sienna pointed out. Now that you mention it, there is a 2-year difference. But if you really had to classify it, we're both in our early 20s, Anis argued back. Is the body's age really that important when, at our core, we're both hundreds of years old? Sienna insisted. Don't you think it's strange to count the years when I was dead as part of my age? Anis refuted. Also, regardless of what's at the core, I still think it's better for the shell to not be hundreds of years old, don't you? Didn't I say that I've magically reconstructed my body? Sienna repeated herself impatiently. Anis acted innocent. Oh my, I didn't mean to target you in particular when I said that, Sienna, but it seems I've poked a sore point. Sienna and Anis weren't crying any longer. The two were now exchanging looks through narrowed eyes. They had just been embracing each other but soon parted as they both took a step back. Flop. Mare, who had been trapped in between them, sprawled on the ground. You cheeky bitch. Sienna suddenly let out a scream as she grabbed Anis by the hair. Not to be outdone, Anis also grabbed Sienna's hair. You ancient tree bitch. Sienna was undaunted. How dare you get a head start on me? He heard all about it. You stole Hamel's, Eugene's lips. You're not a child anymore. So why are you pulling on your friend's hair just because she got a kiss in before you did? Anis yelped. Sienna stammered. It wasn't just any kiss. I heard the whole story. When you stole Eugene's lips, you stole his first kiss. Anis scoffed. Could it be that you actually are a child? Don't you know that that bastard Hamel was the type of guy who did everything and anything during his time as a mercenary? Why should that matter? Sienna stubbornly insisted. That's all in his past life. Also, all mercenaries were like that. At least he never did that sort of thing once he met up with us. The past isn't important, it's the present. The vital fact of the matter is that you took the present Hamel's first kiss. Is the fact that it was Hamel's first kiss really the only important thing to consider? That was my first kiss too. And that means it was also the first kiss for the owner of this body, Christina. Anis confessed. At these words, Sienna's brows shot up. Then she even started using her other hand to pull on Anis's hair. That means you all exchanged your first kisses together. I'm the only one who had hers stolen. Sienna complained. Sylphlen, did you say that it was stolen? Does that mean Hamel was the one who personally initiated the kiss? Anis's eyes widened angrily as she also started grabbing onto Sienna's hair with both hands. That's right, it was stolen. Sienna confirmed proudly. Does that make you jealous? Ha. Anis sneered. I'm not the slightest bit jealous. It's better to steal a kiss than to have it stolen. That's why I'm the one who did the stealing. Before you could. Sienna cursed. Why don't you just descend already, you ghost? Shut your mouth. Your breath smells like rotten tree roots. Anis yelled back. Eugene slowly began edging closer to the two women who were still tearing at each other's hair. He hesitantly tried to intercede. No matter how angry you are, don't you think you're being too harsh with your words? They both hissed angrily. What? Eugene winced. I mean, telling her to ascend already. Isn't that a little? Eugene. Are you really siding with Anis right in front of me? Sienna accused. Hold on please, just listen until I'm done talking. Eugene pleaded. This goes for you too, Anis. What you said to Sienna was far too rude. Sienna doesn't smell of rotten tree roots at all. In the first place, what would tree roots even smell like? Anis defended herself. Sienna was the one who insulted me first. Sienna is also the one who started pulling on my hair first. Hamel, just think about it clearly. The hair that Sienna pulled out just now isn't mine but Christina's. What crime has Christina done to deserve such humiliation? Sister, let's make that wicked witch into a baldy. Christina responded to Anis's anger with a bloodthirsty war cry. Stop, stop. Eugene yelled, and he thrust his head between them as Anis and Sienna started tearing at each other's hair again. You don't need to do this. Why don't you just rip out my hair instead? Just take my life instead. Fine, you son of a bitch. You've finally come up with a good idea, Sienna growled, and as if she had just been waiting for the opportunity, she let go of Anis's hair and started pulling on Eugene's hair instead. Hamel, if you say something like that, do you really think I wouldn't do it? Anis screeched as she also immediately began to pull on Eugene's hair. 4 hands started to simultaneously tear away patches of Eugene's hair. Die, you crazy bastard. You son of a bitch. Torn off gray hair scattered across the ceiling. At this sight, Rhaenyra curled into a ball on the sofa and began to shake in fear. Mare, who had regained consciousness at some point, seemed to have become enraged as well as she also started to pinch and bite Eugene's leg. While receiving this assault, Eugene didn't put up any form of resistance. Instead, his expression seemed as peaceful as if he was just taking a walk under the warm sunlight. That's right, this is fine, Eugene thought. After all, the torn-off hair would just grow back. Ignoring the agony he could feel on his scalp, Eugene closed his eyes. Chapter 310, Sienna Meridian 6. Anis and Sienna were now sitting together with much more modest attitudes, opposite Eugene, who was sitting down on a sofa. Even though the two of them still seemed distracted by continuously shooting glares at each other, they were still sitting fairly close to each other, and Eugene felt a burst of pride at this sight. The floor around the sofa was strewn with torn-off strands of gray hair. In the small distance between Sienna and Anis, the hopes for peace and friendship lying there had been won through Eugene's sacrifice of his own hair. What are you smiling so proudly for? I can still smack your other cheek, you know. Eugene quickly corrected his expression as these threats were shot at him along with Anis and Sienna's piercing gazes. Although their words sounded hostile, neither Sienna nor Anis felt at ease with saying such things. Sienna couldn't help but keep glancing at Eugene's hair, which she had so recently been tearing out. But could the perfection of Eugene's new body really have extended to his hair roots as well? Even with the two of them plucking away at it, not much of Eugene's hair had actually been pulled out. At that time, Sienna had been intent on rendering Eugene completely bald, or at least creating a few bald patches, but Eugene's hair was still so thick and full that it didn't look like any of it had been pulled out at all. Although things had worked out for the best, Sienna still felt a pang of guilt when she saw how swollen Eugene's cheek remained. Sienna believed that she had been left with no choice but to slap him at that moment, but the thought that she might have struck him a bit too hard now ran through Sienna's mind. Sienna hesitantly offered, "Come here, let me treat your face." Before Sienna had even finished speaking, Anise shot up and strode over to Eugene. Then she casually sat beside Eugene and placed her hand on his swollen cheek. "Hey, I said that I was going to treat it," Sienna complained. Anise snorted, "Just think about it, Sienna. Even 300 years ago, you might have already known how to use the elven healing spells, but have your healing spells ever once been more effective than my own?" Sienna argued, "It's not like he's lost an arm or a leg, so what's the point of using such a high level of healing magic when his face is just swole?" Anise cut her short once more. "This isn't an injury you can dismiss by saying it's just swollen. It's only thanks to the fact that Hamel is so inhumanely strong that it's only swollen to this extent. If a normal person had been struck by your slap, their head would have exploded like a water balloon." Her words were irrefutable. Sienna's lips twitched as she shot up from her seat. Then she sat down next to Eugene just like Anise had done. "I'm sorry for hitting you," Sienna said after she managed to muster up her courage and placed her hand on the back of Eugene's own. "I'm sorry for tearing your hair out," Anise chimed in as she casually placed her hand on Eugene's thigh. Sienna's eyes widened into circles at the sight of this bold and outrageous gesture. However, Sienna still couldn't bear to place her hand on Eugene's thigh like Anise had. The best that Sienna could do was swallow a gulp and caress the back of Eugene's muscled and veiny hand. Sienna stammered, I'm also sorry." Caught between Sienna rubbing the back of his hand and Anise caressing his thigh like she was stroking the head of a dog, Eugene decided to start off with an apology. Eugene cleared his throat. "About this I don't have any experience with this, but seeing that this situation is the way it is, I feel." "Hold on," Sienna quickly spoke up. "I'm just telling you this in advance, Eugene, but you do know that I have no intention of forcing you to choose between me and Anise, right?" Although 300 years was an extremely long time for all of them, what Sienna was especially afraid of was just how deep the feelings that Anise and Eugene had developed during the time she had been sealed away. 300 years ago, the feelings that Sienna and Anise had built up with Hamel should have been on an equal level. But the problem was that Anise had managed to reunite with Eugene before Sienna had. She might not know just how tightly that snake-like woman had managed to wrap her coils around Eugene during her absence. In fact, even after setting that concern aside from 300 years ago until now, Sienna had always had the intention of respecting Anise's feelings. Anise's lips suddenly parted as she said, "It's not just the two of you." No, was this really Anise? The sense of presence coming from behind those blue eyes had changed. Christina addressed Sienna. "It's nice to meet you, the wise lady Sienna. My name is Christina Rogerus. I am the original owner of this body that was created due to Lady Anise's noble sacrifice. I am the saint of this current era and a woman who is embarrassed to confess that she also loves Sir Eugene." Sienna stammered, What did you just say?" "I, who was about to be imprisoned by the chains of faith for the rest of my life, was freed by Sir Eugene," Christina declared. "Sir Eugene gave me salvation. Just like how Lady Sienna and Lady Anise both hold Sir Eugene in their hearts, I, too, have come to hold Sir Eugene in a special place in my heart." Eugene's face blushed bright red. Even though from his previous life up until now he'd received so much praise and awe about his fighting abilities that he'd grown tired of hearing them, Eugene had never once heard anything like this. So he couldn't help but want to escape from this embarrassing and heavy sense of devotion that was being directed his way. That being said, just because he had the thought didn't mean that he was really about to try and escape. If he did run away, it wouldn't end with just his hair being pulled out like it had before. "Lady Anise and I both agree with what you said earlier, Lady Sienna. Making him choose like this will only lead to blame and loss, and such a choice would be cruel and painful for all of us," Christina said as she stared at Eugene. "Another thing we need to consider is that we can't afford to be focused on such peaceful concerns right now. From 300 years ago up until now, Sir Eugene is a hero who has dedicated himself to saving the world. And now that he has been reincarnated into this era, he has even been chosen by the Holy Sword and taken up the role of the hero." Swish. Christina's hand, which had still been caressing Eugene's thigh, rose up slightly. Then, with outstretched fingers, Christina slowly traced the lines of Eugene's thigh as she kept talking. "Of course, even if he wasn't chosen by the Holy Sword, Sir Eugene, who is filled with such a noble sense of justice, would have dedicated his life to saving the world and destroying the demon kings in any case. Noble sense of justice? Sienna repeated doubtfully. Was it really possible to describe Hamel with such words? For a moment, this question ran through Sienna's head. No, in fact, such a description was undeniable. After all, 300 years ago, all 5 of them had held the belief that they needed to slay all of the demon kings in order to save the world. It was just that Sienna felt a strong sense of incongruity when it came to Christina's choice of words. To think that she would describe Hamel, who lived his whole life with curses permanently dripping from his lips, as having a noble sense of justice. Did she really have the courage to express her affection in such a blatant way? Sienna stared at Christina's face in bewilderment. She could practically see drops of honey dripping from Christina's eyes. These were definitely the eyes of a maiden in love. Sienna corrected her sitting posture. She had finally realized that Christina Rogerus, who was hundreds of years younger than herself, wasn't a competitor that she could look upon lightly. Sienna cleared her throat. Ahem. Fine, you are correct. But before we continue talking about this, how exactly would you prefer I address you? Please just call me by whatever is most convenient to you, Lady Sienna. How dare I presumptuously make demands of Lady Sienna's means of address? Christina politely declined. Could Christina mean something else by saying all that? Sienna decided not to think about it too deeply. Christina resumed speaking. Although I've already said this before, in this current era and with the situation that we are in, I believe that we can't afford to take the time to seriously consider such idle concerns. But if I had to frame it in more extreme terms. Lady Sienna, hypothetically, and I truly do mean hypothetically, what if Sir Eugene chooses someone other than Lady Sienna? That's absurd. Sienna snapped. That's why I said that it's just hypothetical, Christina said as she stared at Sienna with a slight smile. Would Lady Sienna be able to stay at Sir Eugene's side even after he made such a choice? Would you really be able to devote all your strength to our mission to slay the demon kings? What are you saying? It's obvious what my answer is. When it comes to slaying the demon kings and saving the world, why you can't bring such pure private feelings into it? Sienna insisted. Although she said this, Sienna's voice couldn't help but tremble in consternation. After staring at Sienna with a calm gaze for a few moments, Christina grinned brightly. Indeed, Christina nodded. You really do have the noble character befitting one of the great heroes who last saved our world. However, I don't think that I would be able to do the same. Lady Anice's thoughts might be different from my own, but if Sir Eugene didn't choose me, I feel like I would be unable to overcome my sorrow and would instead lock myself away in a monastery for the rest of my life. Not only did Sienna's jaw drop, but Eugene's lips also parted in shock as they heard these radical words. Christina changed the subject. Well, in the first place, I don't feel like there is really a need to make a choice. Lady Anise and I are already getting along quite well, and we can manage while being considerate of each other's feelings. I believe that Lady Sienna and I can also have a similar relationship. If a person is one of the nobility, as long as they have exceptional abilities and can afford to do so, isn't it still considered morally acceptable for a single woman to have many husbands? Thinking about it now, I do recall that the great Sir Vermouth also had dozens of wives. Flustered, Sienna kept stammering, well, that's true, but, I have no intention of having several husbands, you know. The same goes for me as well, Christina agreed. In my case, apart from Eugene, there is no one I would consider taking as my husband. Please stop, Eugene whined as he leaped out of his seat, unable to continue listening to this any longer. Did you two intend to make me commit suicide out of shame? Please sit down, Sir Eugene. This is a talk that we definitely need to have, Christina said as she looked at Eugene. Then Christina paused for a moment before nodding. Christina turned to Sienna. Lady Sienna, Lady Anise would like to continue this conversation tonight over some drinks. Without Sir Eugene, just the 3 of us. All right, Sienna stammered a reply while sweating profusely. As the 2 of them set up a time to meet later for their drinks, Eugene, who had just leaped up from his seat, was the only one left, still standing in an awkward position. Then casually, as if trying to make it like he had never stood up in the first place, Eugene sat down again. By the way, Sienna, Anise, who had swapped back with Christina, said as she stared straight into Sienna's eyes with a worried expression. I'm still concerned about your current state. You did say that you were able to leave the seal right after Raizakia was killed, but are there really no other problems with your body? This was something that Eugene was also concerned about. 300 years ago, Sienna had been struck with a fatal blow and was left in a state where it wouldn't be strange if she died at any moment. Eugene still felt like it was a dream to have Sienna at his side right now. It's not like there aren't any problems, Sienna muttered as her brows furrowed. After all, the fact is that I was afflicted with a wound that brought me close to death, and I was barely hanging on to my life for the past 200 years. So I have become a little weaker. How much weaker? Anise prompted. If it's ordinary magic, I can use it as much as I want, but I can't use the eternal hole for too long, Sienna admitted. Though that's only the case for now at least. Raizakia's poison had been purified completely. However, there was still the problem of the wound that Vermouth had inflicted on her. Even 200 years ago, that wound hadn't been just any ordinary injury. Sienna had been able to escape to the elven domain by using the leaves of the world tree. But even after she was in a safe place, she had struggled to treat the wound. My current body doesn't carry the injury from back then because I had to completely reconstruct that dying body. However, the injury still remains in my soul, Sienna revealed. Eugene frowned. But when I saw your spirit body, you didn't have any holes in you? As Eugene said this, Sienna turned to look at Eugene with a terrifying expression. Hey, you idiot. Do you really think that there would be a hole running right through my soul just because I said it's injured? If there really was a hole like that, I would already be dead. Why are you getting so angry? Eugene mumbled sulkily. Because you keep saying such stupid things. If you really have learned magic properly, then you should refrain from sounding like an idiot, Sienna lectured pointedly as she poked Eugene in the cheek. Injuries of the soul aren't something that can be seen with the naked eye. Still, it's not as serious as it was 200 years ago. Because the world tree went so far as to drain all its reserves to heal my soul. However, the wound still hadn't healed completely. I've tried experimenting with it a few times, but every time I try to activate the eternal hole, I get distracted by the wound in my soul. If I use it too much or for too long, the injury could reverse its current progress and even worsen, Sienna said calmly. Can't anything be done with Anise's holy magic? Eugene asked hopefully. Anise answered him, I'll have to take a closer look to be sure, but I feel like it's probably impossible. Although holy magic can restore a damaged body, it can't be used to heal the wounds of the soul. Even without being able to use the eternal hole, Sienna was still one of the best wizards in the world. That had been the case even back then 300 years ago. However, these long 300 years had allowed Eugene's enemies to grow far too strong. Especially the greater demon folks, Incarceration's Blade and the Queen of the Night Demons, who even in the past had required all 5 of them to work together to achieve victory. Then there was the Demon King of Incarceration, who they hadn't managed to defeat in battle. Finally, there was the Demon King of Destruction who had caused them all to feel despair. Eugene had been able to kill Raizakia because the dragon had been arrogant. Raizakia hadn't attempted to increase his forces like Gavid or Noir had, nor did he harvest any life force from humans. The way that Raizakia had chosen to increase his strength was to use Rhaenyra as a seedbed, but even that hadn't worked out for him. In such a state, he had been trapped within a dimensional rift. While Gavid and Noir were increasing their strength and training their abilities, Raizakia's strength had instead been slowly draining away. By absorbing Edmund's dark power, he had managed to regain some measure of his full strength, but it was still easy to see that Raizakia's power couldn't be compared to that of the other dukes. That only made the scope of the problem that they were facing even bigger. Although he had come close several times, Eugene had still failed to kill Raizakia all on his own. Well, almost killing an opponent that would have required all 5 of them to attack together in his previous life to have the same effect was a rather impressive feat. But if he considered the enemies that he would have to face in the future, Eugene felt that taking pride in such a thing was pointless. Relying on ignition overstacking would be insane, Eugene thought to himself. The strength that Eugene had reached at that moment had managed to overwhelm Raizakia. But so what? If he had had a minute, no, even with just a few more seconds, he might have been able to tear out Raizakia's throat. But in the end, a defeat was a defeat. If Sienna hadn't arrived, Eugene's heart might have shattered from the price of using Agarotha's ring and stacking ignition twice. There's no need to think about it so seriously, Sienna said with a smile as she turned to look at Eugene. The world tree in the elven territory may have lost its power, and it will need a long time to regain the majesty that it once had. But Eugene, haven't I heard that there are a few saplings of the world tree in your family's estate? If I recuperate there, it should allow me to slowly heal this wound. Even if it doesn't, at least it won't get any worse. That means she also intends to stay at our home, Eugene realized. Although she had naturally been expecting Sienna to do this, Anise still gave a sideways look at Sienna through narrowed eyes. Sienna, having heard all this, I can't help but feel great sorrow. Why on earth would Sir Vermouth inflict such a wound on you? Anise said while letting out a long sigh. Vermouth's attack hadn't just damaged Sienna's body, it had even pierced her soul. Wasn't it easy to figure out what that meant? Vermouth had been fully intent on killing Sienna. I don't know why Vermouth would do that either, Sienna murmured in a low voice as she raised a finger and drew a circle on one side of her head. At this gesture, a transparent ray of light flowed out from Sienna's head and coiled around her finger. This is a memory from 200 years ago, Sienna said as she stretched her finger forward. The memory from when Vermouth attacked me. Chapter 311. Sienna Meridian 7. Sienna's memory was extracted using magic and played out in front of them as a video. 2 centuries ago, Sienna had spent decades creating the circle's magic formula. Afterward, she created the eternal hole to surpass the limit one could reach using the circle's formula. The 9th circle. Then Sienna started preparing to enter seclusion. After creating the eternal hole, Sienna no longer needed Akasha, so she donated the magical device containing the principles of the eternal hole and Akasha to Akron. She hoped that someday, a wizard would succeed in comprehending the eternal whole and materializing it in their body. If they had enough skill, they would be able to even interfere with Akasha and become its new master. All of this had been in preparation for Sienna to sever her ties with the mortal world. Since donating the eternal whole and Akasha, Sienna severed all contact with the monarchy, the Towers of Magic and the Magic Guild. She maintained some level of communication with her disciples, but even that dwindled as she passed on her position as the head of the Green Tower to one of her disciples. Kazaton, where Hamel's tomb was located, was a desert and a territory of Nahama, but until 100 years ago, it belonged to Tiraz rather than Nahama. Vermouth, Molin, Sienna, and Anise had created Hamel's tomb deep underground on the outskirts of Tiraz, in Hamel's hometown. They had erected statues and memorials before placing Hamel's body in a sanctum sealed from intrusion. The tomb was a forbidden place, inaccessible to those who desired entry and immune to an accidental discovery. Furthermore, as a final safeguard, Sienna and her comrades had enshrouded the entire tomb in a seal. Magic was cast over the tomb to preserve it in its original state even with the passage of time, and powerful familiars were stationed to protect it. Sienna had discovered that Hamel's tomb had been defiled at the same time she had been preparing to enter seclusion. The indomitable seal had been shattered, and the familiars had been obliterated. It had been an inconceivable catastrophe. Dozens of years had passed since the tomb's creation. Vermouth had ascended as the patriarch of the newly founded Lionheart family, and his attention had been consumed by the education of his offspring. Molin had established a new kingdom, Roer, and ascended its throne. Anise had found it increasingly difficult to abandon Uraz after being venerated as the saint. Sienna had been no different. She had been consumed by her position as the head of the Green Tower and her relentless pursuit of magical research to develop weapons against the Demon King of Incarceration. These commitments had cost her the time to pay annual respects at the memorial, but her absence could not have been the root of the issue with the tomb's guardians and the seal. Sienna had ensured that the safeguards were potent enough to endure centuries without needing maintenance. Yet the seal had been broken and the familiars were killed. Such an outcome could only mean one thing. Someone had intentionally wreaked havoc in the tomb. But who? An eccentric wizard hell-bent on carving out an underground lair? A dragon seeking a cozy slumber spot? Demons nursing a grudge against Hamel? The identity of the perpetrator was irrelevant as their transgressions were unforgivable. To defile Hamel's tomb with their soiled footsteps was a sacrilege in itself, but their obliteration of the seals and guardians marked them as a clear enemy. The scene playing from Sienna's memories grew darker, then slowly gave way to light. What appeared was an ancient scene played out from Sienna's gaze. While the tomb that Eugene discovered had been a mere husk of ruins, the tomb as seen from Sienna's eyes wasn't yet destroyed. The towering statue stood tall with not even a speck of dust on it. The memorial stone beneath it gleamed white, and the inscriptions etched into the walls were crisp, with not even a single letter faded. Soon Sienna's gaze fell upon the desecrated, the familiars responsible for managing and protecting the tomb. "How dare!" she roared, and the scene warped and wavered. It was a result of an uncontrolled release of her mana. Though the vision did not show Sienna's face, everyone could feel the extent of her rage and her contorted expression. Sienna began moving towards the deepest part of the tomb, where Hamel's body was located. She sensed movement in that area. An intruder. How had they managed to open the door to the room? She didn't bother voicing her concern aloud. At that moment, Sienna's mind was filled with thoughts of tearing apart the unknown intruder, this grave robber, in the most painful way possible. The corridor leading to the burial room was a sight familiar to Eugene. Years ago he too had traversed that same hallway. He had seen his own corpse, clad in dark armor, sitting in front of the firmly closed door. Naturally, there was no death knight in Sienna's memory. The door wasn't closed either, but rather wide open. Sienna's stride halted in the corridor. Eugene held his breath as he watched her memory play out. Anise covered her mouth with her hands and Sienna closed her eyes, not wanting to see her memory play out once more. A man, cloaked in a dark robe, stood in the room. The coffin was already open, and hovering above it was a sword hilt without a blade, enveloped in light. A dull gray hue shrouded the sword hilt, making it appear as though it floated amidst a full moon. "A vermouth," Sienna called out incredulously. There was no way Sienna could mistake that light. Even so, her trembling voice carried strong disbelief. Vermouth had died years ago. Although it had seemed impossible, Vermouth, who seemed less bound by mortality than anyone else, had died sooner than any of his surviving comrades. "Vermouth. Is that you, Vermouth?" Sienna stuttered as she staggered forward towards the man. The man turned his gaze away from the sword floating above the coffin, revealing golden eyes that shimmered under his hood. His eyes were reminiscent of a lion. The vision shook violently. Sienna's gaze descended beneath Vermouth. She saw a sagging body. It was Hamel's corpse. Although decades had passed, it showed no signs of decay due to being magically preserved. Vermouth held Hamel's corpse in his arms. "What are you doing over there?" asked Sienna. Confusion outweighed her hostility. However, Vermouth remained silent. He raised his hands slightly and Hamel's corpse began to rise into the air. Sienna squinted her eyes as she anticipated his next move. Hamel's body was flung toward her, or rather shot toward her. The thought of evasion never crossed Sienna's mind. Instead, she quickly unfurled a spell in an attempt to halt Hamel's body and keep it unscathed mid-air. However, Vermouth's magic, which Sienna had found strange since their journey through the Devildom, prevented Hamel's body from stopping mid-flight. As the body rapidly approached, Sienna reflexively stretched out her arms to catch Hamel's body. Q. The moment she made contact with the body, the force propelling it was fully transferred to Sienna. The corpse remained undamaged, but Sienna was thrown backward by the impact. Even as she was sent flying to the end of the corridor, Sienna's eyes remained fixated on Hamel's corpse. The body lay collapsed on the ground, and beyond it loomed the golden eyes of a beast. "Vermouth!" Sienna yelled, filled with immense rage. Vermouth had thrown Hamel's corpse as a weapon. Vermouth had thrown Hamel's corpse? Though she still could not understand, Vermouth did not seek Sienna's understanding. Without saying a single word, he glared at Sienna with his cold, golden eyes. Vermouth disappeared from Sienna's sight. Without hesitation, she activated the Eternal Hole. A giant storm of mana materialized in front of her. But she could not fight here. After making that decision, Sienna escaped from the corridor. She intended to leave the tomb, but Vermouth did not allow her to. After disappearing from her sight, Vermouth was already standing with his back against the statue and the memorial stone. "Why are you?" Decades ago, all of them had shed tears in front of that very statue. Vermouth himself had inscribed the names on the memorial stone. Vermouth had seldom shown his emotions during their journey. To Sienna's knowledge, the first tears he shed throughout their decade-long journey had been when Hamel died. After becoming the head of the Lionheart family, Vermouth acted as if he had severed ties with his companions. Sienna believed she had no right to resent his choice. They had failed in keeping Hamel's legacy and everyone's wish. They had failed in killing the Demon Kings. They had failed. They lacked power. Sienna had been fine with that. She didn't want to live in a world without Hamel, so she thought dying in the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration like Hamel would be an acceptable death. But she did not die. By the time she regained her senses, everything had been over. Without consulting anyone, Vermouth had made an oath with the Demon King of Incarceration on his own. In that way, he saved his comrades, retrieved Hamel's corpse and soul, and restored peace to the world. It wasn't as if she didn't understand Vermouth's heart. However, only Hamel had died among their party of 5. Her emotions were discordant with her heart. As such, Sienna resented Vermouth for a while. She just wanted someone to blame, and Vermouth was a perfect candidate. Then everyone got busy living their own lives. It was a selfish excuse. No matter how busy everyone was, she could have always visited if she wanted to. But she did not want to face her trauma, and she did not want her sad, angry memories to resurface. She regretted her choice many times. When Sienna heard that Vermouth had died suddenly, she had sobbed in the room where she had gotten the news, in Vermouth's family home, in front of Vermouth's coffin, and at his tomb in the Black Lion Castle. She had thought they had all the time in the world. If they wanted, they could indefinitely extend their lifespan. So, someday when they could no longer make excuses and were ready to face the Demon King once more, she thought they would get together again. "I cried at your death," Sienna shouted at Vermouth. She was bombarded with attacks from all sides. The numerous spells she cast offset Vermouth's attacks and chased after him. The whole tomb shook and cracks began appearing in the walls. Why here of all places? The walls and the ceiling were collapsing. Sienna desperately altered the trajectory of the attacks to prevent the memorial stone and the statue from being swept away. But Vermouth did not care. The attacks, both physical and magical, came at Sienna without any care for the surroundings. He was serious. Vermouth was attacking for real. The vision shook violently. Sienna could not track Vermouth's movements properly. Red splatters appeared at the edge of her vision. Eugene watched the video with bloodshot eyes. Sienna's sight was gradually dyed red. She coughed and spat blood onto the ground while looking down. "Please." She barely managed to raise her head to look forward. Her robe was already torn. Ash-gray hair spilled out behind his hood like a lion's mane. A white flame was seemingly burning around him, engulfing everything it touched and dyeing it in its color. Say something, Vermouth," Sienna beseeched. Vermouth raised his hand in response and pointed at Sienna. She felt no killing intent from him. In fact, she could not sense any emotions in his eyes. However, the power gathering in his hand, though devoid of any hostility, presented Sienna with a sense of absolute death. Sienna vomited blood while stretching both hands forward. The Eternal Hole released numerous spells according to Sienna's will. The flame collided with magic. Sienna did not bother waiting for the outcome. Instead, she immediately flew towards the corridor. She knew it was impossible to defeat Vermouth, even if she used the Eternal Hole. At this rate, she would die at the hands of Vermouth without knowing the reason. Hamel. She possessed a leaf of the world tree she had brought from her homeland. As a family member of the elves, Sienna could use the leaf of the world tree to teleport there at any time. She would take Hamel's body and take refuge in her homeland for now. Since killing Vermouth was impossible, this was the only option left for her. Sienna returned to the corridor while spitting blood. Boom. She heard the world collapsing from behind her, but Sienna did not look back. She came to a stop in front of Hamel's body as she panted for breath. Thankfully, it was still whole and intact. Sienna felt sincerely relieved. She then took out and held the leaf of the world tree, and as she bent down to lift Hamel's body, flat. It was when she had made contact with Hamel's corpse with her hand. Her vision shook greatly, and her body was instantly stripped of its strength. She saw a hand soaked in blood with her trembling eyes. It was Vermouth's hand, and it had pierced through her chest. Vermouth's mouth. Her gaze swung upwards. Vermouth, his arms still buried in her chest, lifted her frail form from the ground. From her vantage point, she could not catch sight of Vermouth's face. It was hidden behind the wound that pierced her back and chest. Her body refused to respond, and she was terrified of seeing Vermouth's expression. A gentle tremor. Then a hand reached for her slowly until it found her throat. With a sharp snap, the necklace she wore around her neck was ripped out. Ah! Sienna attempted to form words, but her vision swayed once again before she could speak. Her limp form was hurled across the room, and she crashed onto the misshapen lid of the casket. Kua. With a strenuous effort, Sienna lifted her head, a stream of blood spilling from her lips. She saw Vermouth standing motionless with his blood-stained hand still extended. His face remained indistinct. With his head bowed, Vermouth stared at the necklace he had wrested from Sienna. Hamel's corpse was strewn at Vermouth's feet. He did not spare a glance for his dying companion, whose heart he had pierced with his own hand. Her vision, awash with crimson, was growing dim. She noticed Vermouth's shoulders trembling. His downcast gaze slowly rose, revealing a contorted expression and quivering eyes. That was the last image Sienna saw of Vermouth. Whoosh. The video dissipated into thin air. "You all know what happened afterward," said Sienna. Although it was healed, it felt as if the wound in her chest was fresh as she recalled the painful memory. "I successfully teleported to the World Tree, but the injury remained. Then I was ambushed by Rhyzakia," explained Sienna. "Sir Vermouth," Anise muttered in a daze as she pressed her hand against her head. The man she witnessed in Sienna's memory was unmistakably Vermouth. Eugene unclenched his fist while grinding his teeth in frustration. Blood dripped from his fist as a result of gripping it too harshly. "It's as you said," Eugene broke the silence. "It definitely was Vermouth. Yet something felt off, as if it weren't him."